Hi, this is Austin. I'm going to talk about assignment 8, which I actually finished. So, first things first, this is the texture one, the texture graphics object. I'll run it real quick. While I'm waiting on that, I'll talk a bit about it. So, here's the render function. All it does is it sets its texture instead of the color, and other than that, it's pretty much the same as the color one. And it uses that to set the texture resource and sampler. So here we go. The dice and the top, bottom, left, right cube, both fine. And as you can probably guess from the fact this is working, I did get most of the texture stuff that I hadn't figured out in previous assignments finished now, but I'm not going to go back over that. You can see the shader texture in here, so that should be enough. So next up I'll talk about the color light graphics object. So I have the material struct in here. I could have just used 3vex, I suppose, but I would prefer to do it this way. Set the ambient, diffuse, and specular. Set the world, well that's the same. And then I use the 3 components of the material here. So here it is. You can see the light coming from this angle, illuminates stuff. And if I change to the other side, it's not illuminated anymore. So there it is. And as a side note, the fact that I did include the material here will be useful in when I implement the when I did implement rather the meshes, because then you can just keep an array of materials rather than keeping 3 arrays of vectors. So the texture light graphics object is pretty much a combination of both. It has the material and the texture. Some commented out functions for setting the light parameters, but then I realized that you should just do that through the shader. The code itself is the same, it's just that now it does the world material and the sampler, and it uses the texture light HLSL file. So here we go. There's just the default box. And then the Sparrow texture, or the Sparrow model that I found online and loaded in, with this beautiful blood red material that makes it look really awful. But you can see the texture is lined up as it should be. Look at it from a couple other angles too. So now I'll look back through all the C++ files with compatibility for meshing. This is the texture light one, starting with the most complicated one first, because that's the order I opened them in. Pass in 2 arrays, one that has the material, one that has the texture. Sets those here. I have 2 functions that set all of them, and then 2 functions that set for a specific mesh number for each array. And the render just goes through all of them, does both of those, and then renders it. Just texture will be the second half of that, with just the texture array, and then sends that. The color light will be the first half of that. I'm missing some deletes, but I'll add those. I just noticed that. Yeah, the first half of the stuff from the texture light will be in the color light, so the material array and then the rendering the material. So I'll also talk real quick about the further work and my ideas of how I would approach that. So first of all, the shader base class would probably need to have some sort of send data virtual function that would be overridden by the child shaders, so that instead of having to send light parameters, send world and material, you could call that one function and it would do both of those from there. That way you could call it from within this for loop for multiple shaders without having to have different code for each shader. So same with this, would be bundled into that sort of send data virtual function as well. In addition to that, you'd have to pass in an array of shaders rather than just one shader when you're setting the shader. And you'd set each node in the array, presumably one per mesh. And then here, rather than just setting the context once, you'd set it once for each shader at the beginning of this loop. So rather than just you'd move this like say here, Control X, Control V. Of course that happens. Control X, Control V. Do that here, and then just do piece shader I dot get context, and then here as well. And that would be my my take on how to handle that issue.